The Arizona sun hung heavy in the sky, baking the desert like an oven, as Jake Calloway nudged his buckskin mare Whiskey down the dusty trail. The air smelled of sagebrush and regret. Jake tipped his sweat-stained Stetson lower shielding eyes that had witnessed more gunfights than sunrises. It was 1887, the year progress started gnawing at the edges of the frontier, but out here, the land still played by its own rules. 3 days in the saddle had left him saddle sore and dreaming of coffee stronger than his ex-wife's opinions. At 45, Jake was built like a fence post, lean, tough, and held together by stubbornness. His hands told stories of broken Mustangs and broken promises, the latter being why he'd traded a wedding ring for a bedroll 5 years back. The town of Silver Bend materialized ahead, its false front buildings wobbling in the heat like a drunk after payday. Jake needed bullets beans and maybe a bath if the saloon girl wasn't too particular. As Whiskey clopped past the livery, a kid perched on a barrel of pickles caught his eye. Couldn't have been more than 12, with hair the color of stale hay and boots held together by hope. But it was the boy's stare that stuck sharp as a rattler's rattle, yet softer at the edges, like he'd been left in the sun too long. "Howdy, mister." The kid drawled, thumb hooked in his overalls like a miniature rancher. Jake nodded, reaching for the general store's door, when the boy added, "You look like a man who knows his way around a dynamite stick." Jake froze. Behind him, Whiskey snorted as if to say, "Here we go again." The kid held up a crooked grin and a stick of what was definitely not licorice. "Found it by the creek. Reckon it's still good." Suddenly, the desert heat felt downright frosty. Jake's voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. "Son, that's not a candy cane." The boy's eyes widened. "So, it is dynamite." Somewhere a tumbleweed rolled past like God's own punchline. Jake sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose where his last hangover still lingered. "Tell you what, you hand that over real gentle-like and I'll buy you an actual licorice stick. Hell, I'll throw in a sarsaparilla." As the kid debated, a gunshot cracked in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone yelling, "Dang it, Clyde, that was my foot." Jake closed his eyes. Just another Tuesday in Silver Bend. The boy's voice was soft, but carried the weight of 100 lonely nights. "You look like a real cowboy, the kind from the stories." There was a hitch in his words, the kind that made Jake's gut twist. He turned, really seeing the kid for the first time, the sunburned nose, the too big shirt, the way his fingers twisted the hem like he was holding on to something invisible. Stories. Jake almost laughed. The only stories he knew ended with empty bottles and emptier beds. "Name's Eli," the boy said, scuffing his boot in the dirt. "Well, most folks just call me Kid." He took a deep breath like he was about to jump off a cliff. "I was wondering, maybe you'd let me ride with you, just for a day." The words hit Jake like a stray bullet. Suddenly he wasn't in Silver Bend anymore. He was back on his brother's ranch, watching a little boy with the same sun-bleached hair wobble on his first pony. "Teach me to ride like you, Uncle Jake." Tommy's voice echoed in his skull, bright as a copper penny. That was before the drought, before the bank took the land, before the fever took Tommy. "Ride with me." Jake's voice came out rougher than a saw blade. "Where's your your pop?" Eli's shoulders hunched, but his chin stayed up. "Ain't got none. Just old Miss Hattie at the boarding house, but she's got 6 other kids to feed." He swallowed hard. I want to know what it's like, to have somebody choose you, even if it's just till sundown." The saloon doors squeaked in the wind. Somewhere a harmonica whined a tune about lost love. Jake rubbed his thumb over the scar on his palm, the one he got breaking a wild stallion the summer Tommy turned 7. Then Eli hit him with the kicker. "I can work. I know how to mend fences, and I'm good with horses. Last week I calmed down the blacksmith's mare when she was fit to bust." His eyes were too old for his face. "I won't slow you down." Jake spat in the dust. The kid had grit, he'd give him that. "Tell you what, Eli, I gotta check on a stray herd near Cedar Creek. It's a hard ride and the cattle ain't friendly." He tilted his hat back. "You keep up, don't complain, and don't touch my whiskey. Reckon you can be a cowboy for a day." The boy's grin could have powered the whole damn territory. As Jake turned toward the general store, he caught his reflection in the window, and for the first time in years, he didn't see a broken-down drifter. He saw a man who still had something left to give. Somewhere behind them, the harmonica player launched into Red River Valley. Jake didn't believe in signs, but the timing was damn near poetic. The boy's face lit up like a prairie sunrise, his whole body vibrating with excitement. "You mean it swear you ain't joshing me?" He grabbed Jake's sleeve with dirt-smudged fingers, then caught himself and jerked back like he'd touched a hot stove. Sorry, mister. I mean, I'll be so good you won't even know I'm there. Jake held up a calloused hand. Whoa there, buckaroo. 2 conditions we clear this with Miss Hattie, and come sunrise tomorrow we part ways. No tears, no following me to the next town. Understood. Eli nodded so hard his hat nearly flew off. I'll fetch her right now. She's inside counting tins. The boy took off like a jackrabbit, his boots kicking up little puffs of dust. Alone on the boardwalk, Jake rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of what he'd just agreed to settle between his shoulder blades. This was loco, the kind of sentimental foolishness that got men killed in dime novels. But when Eli had looked at him with those eyes held, they were the same shade of blue as Tommy's. Something in his chest had cracked open like a dried-up riverbed finally tasting rain. The saloon piano started up a ragged rendition of Buffalo Gals as Miss Hattie emerged, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She had the sharp eyes of a woman who'd buried 2 husbands and outsmarted a land baron. So you're the cowboy who's got my boy all fired up, she said, sizing Jake up like a side of suspect beef. Jake Calloway, ma'am. He tipped his hat. And I reckon fired up might be underselling it. Miss Hattie's gaze could have drilled through granite. Eli's got more heart than sense, Mr. Calloway. His mama left him here 2 winters back, said she'd return. Come spring. We're still waiting. She crossed her arms. He asks every drifter with spurs the same favor. You're the first damn fool to say yes. Jake's throat went tight. He stared at the bullet hole in the saloon door, a relic from some long-forgotten argument. Lost my nephew to scarlet fever 5 years back, he said quietly. Boy about Eli's age. Reckon that's why I couldn't say no. Something shifted in Miss Hattie's face. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a peppermint stick, pressing it into Jake's hand. For when the trail gets long, she said gruffly. Then she turned to Eli, who was practically dancing with anticipation. You listen sharper than a Comanche arrow you hear, and if Mr. Calloway says run, you ask how damn far. Eli threw his arms around her waist. I'll be so good they'll write ballads about me. Jake looked away, suddenly fascinated by a rusty nail in the boardwalk. That's when he felt it, a tiny tentative tug on his coat sleeve. Eli stood holding out a battered harmonica. Found this in the livery, the boy said shyly. Thought maybe we could play tunes by the campfire later. The harmonica had a crack in the reed, just like the one Tommy used to carry. Jake cleared his throat, suddenly aware of 3 cowhands pretending not to eavesdrop outside the saloon. Well, hell, kid, he muttered, shoving the harmonica in his pocket. Guess we're burning daylight. As they walked toward the livery, the piano music swelled behind them, though Jake would swear till his dying day that the last notes sounded suspiciously like Auld Lang Syne. Jake's hands shook as he buckled the new saddlebag, just enough for Eli to notice. The boy said nothing, just ran his fingers over the embossed leather of his first real cowboy hat like it was made of gold. Lesson 1. Jake growled, forcing his voice steady. Your horse ain't a damn rocking chair. He demonstrated how to check the cinch, his movements precise as a gunslinger's draw. 1 loose strap and you'll eat dirt faster than a greenhorn at his first rodeo. Eli mirrored every motion with solemn intensity. When Jake showed him how to test the bridle's fit, the boy's small fingers moved with surprising certainty. Like this, Mr. Calloway. The title stung. Tommy had called him Uncle Jake. Just Jake, he muttered, adjusting Eli's grip on the reins. And don't death grip the leather. You're guiding a living creature, not strangling a chicken. As they rode out past the town limits, the setting sun turned the mesa into a burning cathedral. Eli sat straighter in the saddle than most grown men Jake had ridden with. You've done this before, Jake accused. Eli's cheeks pinked beneath his freckles. Maybe mucked some stalls at Miss Hattie's. Might have snuck rides on the milk wagon horse when nobody was looking. He shot Jake a sideways glance. You gonna send me back? A jackrabbit burst from the brush, startling Eli's mare. Without thinking, Jake reached across, but the boy had already calmed the horse with a murmured word and steady hands. Jake's breath caught. Tommy had done the exact same thing his first time on a Mustang. Reckon not, Jake said gruffly. He nudged Whiskey closer until their stirrups nearly touched. But we're adding Rule 2, no lying to your trail partner, even by omission. Eli's answering smile could have powered a steam engine. As they crested the ridge, the boy gasped at the valley below, a sea of golden grass swaying in the evening breeze. It's like Like, like God spilled his whiskey. Jake finished without thinking. Eli's laughter rang out clear and bright as a church bell. At that moment, Jake felt something shift in his chest like a rusted gate creaking open after years of disuse. The ghost still whispered, but for the first time in half a decade, they didn't drown out the living. Whiskey flicked her ears back, sensing the change. Jake patted her neck, his calloused fingers catching on a burr. He plucked it free and held it out to Eli. Lesson 3. Always check for these. They'll make your horse buck like the devil's riding her. Eli finished producing 3 more from his own saddlebag. Found him when we tacked up. Jake stared. Then he did something that shocked them both. He laughed, a real belly-deep sound that sent a covey of quail exploding from the brush. Maybe, just maybe, some fences could be mended after all. The desert sunset bled crimson across the sky as they reached the watering hole where 50 head of longhorns stood belly-deep in the creek. Jake spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Now the real education begins," he said, watching Eli's face. "Cattle ain't like people, they don't lie. Every thought shows in them big, dumb eyes." He demonstrated the cowboy's dance, how to angle his body to turn a stubborn steer, how to use the horse as an extension of himself. When Jake let Eli try moving a rangy heifer, the boy's first attempt sent the animal bolting toward the mesquite. "Christ almighty," Jake muttered, riding after the runaway. He caught up to find Eli already circling the heifer, his small mare cutting off escape routes like a seasoned cow pony. The boy's lips moved silently. Jake realized he was counting seconds between the animal's panicked breaths. "You got the makings of a hand," Jake admitted as they drove the chastened heifer back to the herd. Campfire that night smelled of juniper smoke and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Eli listened wide-eyed as Jake spun tales of stampedes that shook the earth and blizzards that froze cattle standing up. "Were you ever scared?" Eli asked, poking the fire with a stick. Jake's calloused hands stilled on his whittling. "Son, only fools and corpses don't feel fear." He tested the edge of his knife against his thumb. "My brother used to say courage is just fear that said its prayers." Eli's face went still. "My mama told me that." He traced a pattern in the dirt. "Right before she left." The confession hung between them like gun smoke. Jake stared into the flames, remembering Tommy's fever-glazed eyes the night the doctor said there was no hope. Some abandonments cut deeper than others. When he looked up, Eli had curled into his bedroll, his breathing too even for real sleep. Jake added another log to the fire and took first watch not for cattle rustlers, but for the ghosts that haunted boys with missing parents. Dawn found Eli already tending the horses, his small hands checking hooves with professional care. Jake pretended not to notice the boy's red-rimmed eyes. "Figured you'd sleep till noon," Jake said, rolling his stiff shoulders. Eli shrugged, offering a tin cup of coffee. Wanted to make sure Whiskey's shoe wasn't loose. Noticed it yesterday when he cut himself off, suddenly fascinated by the dirt. Jake's chest tightened. The kid had memorized every detail of their short time together, hoarding memories like a miser with gold, just like Tommy used to do. The rising sun painted Eli's face in gold light, and for one dangerous moment, Jake let himself imagine what it might be like to hear Pa instead of Mister. Then he drained the bitter coffee and kicked dirt over the embers. "Best get moving," he said gruffly. "Long ride ahead." But when Eli turned away, Jake didn't immediately follow. He stood watching the boy's small straight back already carrying more weight than any child should, and wondered when exactly his heart had started making plans without consulting his head. The morning sun revealed what the firelight had hidden. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he brushed Whiskey's coat, and his breathing came quicker than it should for simple chores. Jake caught the boy's chin, tilting his face toward the light. Dark circles shadowed his eyes like bruises. "Spit it out, kid, you sick." Eli jerked away. "Ain't nothing. Just didn't want to miss nothing." He patted Star's neck with forced cheer. "She was fussing at first light is all." Jake's gut twisted. He'd seen that same desperate energy in gold-crazed prospectors, men so afraid of missing their strike, they worked themselves to death. He wordlessly pressed an extra strip of jerky into Eli's hand. As they broke camp, the boy moved with frantic precision, rolling his bedroll tighter than Army regulations demanded. "Today can we—" "Lasso lesson," Jake cut in, "after we move these lumbering idiots to fresh grass." He nodded at the cattle. Eli's grin could have powered a railroad engine, but halfway through the morning drive, Jake noticed the boy's grip on the reins slackening, his posture slumping despite obvious effort. During a water break, Eli surprised him by maneuvering a stubborn heifer with moves that would make a Texas drover proud. "Where'd you learn that?" Jake asked. The boy stiffened. For a long moment, the only sound was cattle lowing and the creek's lazy gurgle, then so quiet Jake barely caught it. Mama was a rancher's daughter. Jake's coffee turned to acid in his throat. Eli scuffed his boot in the dirt. She married this cowboy. Good man, she said, till their baby died of scarlet fever." The words hit like a well-aimed lariat. After that, he drank up every memory, then rode off chasing oblivion. Jake's hands remembered the weight of his nephew's small coffin, the way the whiskey bottle had felt colder than the grave dirt. "Mama was carrying me when he left." Eli continued, staring at the horizon. "We moved a lot. Last winter she—" A shrug that spoke volumes. "Miss Hattie says she'll come back. I know better." The confession hung between them like gun smoke. Jake's pulse roared in his ears. The dates lined up too neatly. Tommy had died 5 years ago. Eli was, 9-10. He studied the boy's profile, the stubborn set of his jaw that mirrored Jake's own, the way his left pinky crooked slightly outward just like Jake's brothers had. The world tilted. Jake opened his mouth, then shut it as Eli swayed dangerously in the saddle. The boy caught himself, but not before Jake saw the sheen of sweat on his pale face. "Enough driving cattle," Jake said abruptly. "Time for that lasso lesson." Eli's protest died when Jake dismounted and lifted him from his horse. The boy's skin burned through his shirt. Fever. Probably had been all night. Jake's throat closed. He'd failed Tommy, failed his brother, wouldn't fail this boy too. "Listen close, son," he said, wrapping Eli in his duster. "First rule of roping, know when you're licked." He whistled for whiskey. "We're riding for Doc Henderson's." Eli's eyes widened. "But the cattle—" "Can wait." Jake mounted up, settling the boy before him. "Family comes first." The word hung between them heavy as a gold nugget. Eli's feverish grip tightened on Jake's sleeve as they turned toward town and toward truths neither had been ready to face. Eli's feverish body trembled against Jake's chest as the boy whispered, "Mama never stopped loving him, said he was a good man who just forgot how to be." The words hit Jake like a shotgun blast to the ribs. Sarah, sweet stubborn Sarah Chen, who'd married his brother, who'd held Jake together when grief over Tommy shattered him, who'd come to him one rain-soaked night when the pain was too much for both of them. Jake's hands convulsed on the reins. The dates lined up with terrifying precision. Eli turned in the saddle, those Chen family eyes too old for his face. "She got sick last winter when he said, the boy's voice cracked like thin ice. "She gave me $30 in your name, said look for a broken-down cowboy near Silver Bend." The horizon blurred. Jake remembered Sarah's hands, how they'd felt threading through his hair the night before he rode out. How he'd been too drunk on grief and whiskey to notice she'd stopped taking her moon tea. "She wanted you to know me," Eli whispered, burning up with fever and the weight of his confession, "even if just for a day." Jake dismounted so fast his boots kicked up dust. He pulled Eli down, clutching the boy's small frame like a drowning man grabs driftwood. The dam burst 7 years of grief, 5 years of running, all of it pouring out in ragged sobs that shook his sun-leathered body. "Eli, son," the word tasted foreign and right all at once. "God almighty, I didn't know." His boy went limp against him. "I know, Pa." He murmured, the title slipping out like it had always been there. "Mama said you didn't." Jake's heart hammered against Eli's fevered brow. He remembered Sarah's letter last winter, the one he'd been too cowardly to open, assuming it was another plea to come home. Now he understood the finality in her looping script. "We're riding for town," Jake said hoarsely, bundling Eli in his duster. "Gonna fetch Doc Henderson, then send a wire to Eli's small hand gripped his wrist. "Can't." A single tear cut through the trail dust on his cheeks. "She's gone, Pa. Buried her myself under the big cottonwood behind the boarding house." The world narrowed to that moment. The heat of Eli's skin, the way his breath hitched like Tommy's used to during asthma attacks, the terrible courage and eyes too young for such loss. Jake pressed his forehead to his son's. The desert held its breath. Somewhere a meadowlark sang the same tune Sarah used to hum while hanging wash. "Then we'll ride there," Jake said, voice steadier than it had been in years. "Pay our respects proper." He lifted Eli onto whiskey hands lingering on the boy's shoulders. "After we get you well." As they turned toward Silver Bend, Eli's weight solid against his chest, Jake realized something had settled in his soul. The ghosts weren't gone. They'd just stepped aside to make room for the living. And for the first time since Tommy's funeral, Jake Calloway didn't feel the need to outrun the sunrise. Eli's breath came in shallow gasps as they rode his small frame burning up against Jake's chest. "Miss Hattie got the wire yesterday," he murmured. "Didn't want to tell me till—" The words dissolved into a cough that shook his whole body. Jake's arms tightened around his son, Sarah, vibrant, whip-smart Sarah, who'd once thrown a cast-iron skillet at a bandit gone. The woman who'd loved his brother, then loved him through their shared grief, who'd carried his child without telling him. He'd never get to beg her forgiveness. But Eli wasn't done. "The sickness, oikes," he whispered. "Doc says it runs in families." Another rattling cough. "I got it too." Jake's vision tunneled. "No." The denial ripped from him like a gunshot. "We'll ride to Tucson, find that new lung specialist. Hell, we'll go all the way to Eli's frail hand touched his wrist. "You know." And Jake did. He'd seen that waxy pallor before on Tommy in his last days. The realization hit like a runaway stallion God had given him his son back, just to rip him away again. "That's why I came," Eli said simply. "Wanted one day with my pa." The raw courage in those words shattered Jake's last defenses. He pressed his face into Eli's hair, breathing in the scent of dust and sickness and boyhood. "Tell me about her," Jake choked out. And as they rode, Eli painted Sarah in words how she'd saved his baby teeth in a tobacco tin, how she'd taught him to read using wanted posters, how she'd hum Barbary Allen while mending clothes. Each memory was a knife twist. Each laugh Jake had missed a fresh wound. Near town, Eli's coughing fit nearly unseated them. Jake dismounted, cradling his son like the precious burden he was. The boy felt lighter than he had at dawn. When the spasms passed, Eli looked up with Sarah's stubborn smile. "Best day ever, Pa." Jake's throat closed. This child, this miracle he didn't deserve, had crossed the territory alone just to gift him this moment. He crushed Eli to his chest, feeling the boy's heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. "You're my legacy," Jake rasped, "even when I was too damn stupid to know it." The sunset painted them in gold as they entered Silver Bend, not a broken drifter and a sickly orphan anymore, but a father and son walking the same painful road at last. And if Jake's hand shook as he carried Eli toward Doc Henderson's well, that was between him and the God he'd stopped believing in 5 years ago. Somewhere beyond the mesa, a coyote yipped a lonesome sound that might have been mourning or celebration, depending on how broken the listener's heart was. The prairie wind carried the scent of wildflowers as Jake Calloway knelt before two simple crosses, one fresh-cut pine, the other weathered oak. He ran calloused fingers over the carved names Eli Thomas Calloway and Sarah Elizabeth Chen. 3 months had turned the raw grief into something quieter, like the deep roots of the mesquite tree shading their graves. "Kept my promise, son," Jake murmured, placing a fistful of bluebonnets by Eli's marker. The boy had loved their color, same as Sarah's favorite calico dress. The wind shifted, bringing the distant jingle of spurs from the ranch below. Jake had hung up his wandering ways, signing on as foreman at the Double Bar K. Every evening at supper, he set an extra plate not out of madness, but memory. Miss Hattie had given him Sarah's last letter. The paper still smelled faintly of lavender. The ink blurred in places where tears had fallen hers, or his Jake couldn't say. "You were always better than you believed," she'd written. "Our boy will show you." And Eli had. In 12 short hours, that brave kid had taught Jake more about fatherhood than most men learned in a lifetime. Now Jake walked the ranch with eyes open, noticing which young hands stood extra watches for sick horses, which orphans at Miss Hattie's needed new boots before winter. His saddlebags no longer carried whiskey bottles, but penny candies and second-hand books. As twilight painted the hills purple, Jake felt it a familiar tug on his sleeve. No ghost, just memory, but strong enough to make him turn his head, half expecting to see sun-bleached hair and a gap-toothed grin. The empty prairie stretched before him, alive with cricket song and the rustle of sage. Somewhere, a meadowlark trilled the opening notes of Barbary Allen. Jake Calloway smiled through the ache. He tipped his hat to the setting sun and walked toward the bunkhouse where a half-finished toy horse waited on his workbench carved from juniper wood for the new orphan boy at Miss Hattie's, who reminded him so much of Eli. Love wasn't a thing you outran after all. It rode with you in the creak of saddle leather, in the scent of rain on dry earth, in the echo of a child's laughter carried on the wind. And sometimes, if you were lucky enough to get a second chance, it even let you stay. If Jake and Eli's journey through the high desert and hard truths resonated with you, throw your brand on our channel like a rancher's iron. We ride these trails every week, bringing you more raw-boned tales of grit and grace from the frontier, where sometimes the shortest rides leave the deepest tracks. Drop your thoughts in the canyon below. Ever had a moment that changed your trail forever? Maybe it was a stranger's kindness at a crossroads or a letter that came 10 years too late. This Old West wasn't just about shootouts and gold strikes. It was about the quiet reckonings that make a man stare at his reflection in a creek and finally recognize the face staring back. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that don't just get told, they get branded on your soul. And remember, partner, the most important trails ain't the ones marked on any map. They're the ones that lead you home. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.